It's time now for Harm Reduction, heard every Tuesday at 7 p.m. with Will Beaton, Cutting Edge Radio, where we'll ask the questions others don't want to ask. Now here's your host, Will Beaton.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Harm Reduction Report. This is indeed Willard TeaBelly, reporting live from the Firebreak Farm here in somewhat cloudy Grass Valley, California. I just returned up here from San Francisco. I spent the weekend in San Francisco having a wonderful, wonderful whirlwind of experience and learning. I learned a lot. So I'm here, like I mentioned in last week's episode, I'm out at Annie Oak's farm. She runs the Women's Visionary Council, who is organizing a risk reduction workshop nearby in Nevada City next week. So I was flown out here to set up and record this workshop they're doing. In the meantime, I'm hanging out on Annie's farm and helping her with some other of her writing projects and learning a lot about the area. Annie had to fly back to Philadelphia to take care of her mother for a couple weeks, so she was very much looking forward to being in San Francisco this last weekend to attend a few events in honor of her friend John Perry Barlow. And I was going to be lucky enough to just be her plus one to some of these memorials and events that were happening in the city this week. But she couldn't be here, but they all invited me to go along anyway. So most of the people that I spent this weekend with, I had just met this week. And I myself have never met John Perry Barlow. And I just have to tell you that after this weekend, wow, I really, really wish I had, because he seems like such a good dude. And the main thing that everyone said about him was he never allowed divisive conversation to rule the day and to prevent people from finding common ground and coming together and working together, no matter how different their political or whatever other kinds of beliefs they had were. And it just sounds great. So John Perry Barlow, it's hard for me to describe who he is exactly, but I'll just say this. He founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is this big nonprofit group that hires people to keep the internet free and do work to ensure that the internet remains a place where freedom and expression will always have precedence over political agendas or anything else. He questions control. That's really what I learned about him. He's all about questioning control. He also was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead and did a whole lot of other things. So he's involved in the psychedelic world, and he's involved in the internet privacy activism world in really, really astonishing ways. And I had known about his work before, but I hadn't quite realized that he had done all these things. And particularly what this episode of the Harm Reduction Report is going to focus on is the fact that how this one man, with his complete dedication to finding common ground and recognizing the love in all of people and accepting and loving absolutely all people, period, how that spirit allowed these very diverse groups, you might think at first glance, people who are interested in internet privacy and people who do psychedelics and go to Grateful Dead shows. Like, what do they have in common? You might think nothing. Well, actually, I learned that those communities have a lot in common, and it makes a lot of sense that they would be allies in some of the things, the work that they're doing. So what happened here in San Francisco was so great, and I definitely don't have enough time to explain it all. I'm going to cut to some audio that was recorded this Saturday at the Internet Archive. The first person you'll hear speaking is Brewster Kahle, who is the founder of the Internet Archive. He'll explain a little bit about how awesome the place is and what it is. But check it out, archive.org. I'll let him explain it. It's very, very cool. So there's going to be a bunch of audio from that Saturday memorial. They had a bunch of speakers come to the Internet Archive to talk about John Perry Barlow, how his internet activism fueled all these other passions. And I mean, just to give you one weird example of how connected and beloved this man Barlow was, the speakers are a very, very diverse range of people, including Edward Snowden, okay? Edward Snowden Skyped into this room and spoke to all of us just to tell us how much he loved Barlow. You see, Barlow's group, the EFF, they helped create that secure drop, which was what Edward Snowden used to leak his documents that he got from the NSA. And so it's because of Barlow and his group and all his friends and the EFF, for one thing, that helped allow Edward Snowden to make the biggest revelation in our recent memory as a country of what's going on with our government and surveillance and stuff. Very important. But that's just one thing. Gilberto Gil messaged in and sent a message explaining how much he loved Barlow. Gilberto Gil is he was the Ministry of Culture in Brazil, and he's an amazing singer and musician. And I mean, he's just like, I was astonished at all the cool people who were here wanting to talk about Barlow, and so I was learning a lot about him. So the first thing we'll do is cut to the Internet Archive, where you'll hear people speaking about Barlow. First, you'll hear from a few of the organizers and people introducing. You'll also hear a quick moment from one of his daughters. He has 3 daughters who are all very active in upholding his legacy. At least that's my impression. And you will also hear from John Gilmore, who will wrap up the end of this archive footage. John, I think, is in the best position to explain how Barlow really connected the psychedelic communities and the internet activism communities. Gilmore founded the Electronic Frontier Foundation with Barlow, and Gilmore is also on the board of MAPS, and I think the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, so that's MAPS, the, say it with me again, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and he'll mention that in his speech as well. You can look up on the archive.org, search John Perry Barlow. You can find all this stuff on the Internet Archive's YouTube channel. You can watch the entire 4-hour-long presentation from the archive. And when the archive audio cuts out here in about 25 minutes, I will explain a little bit more about the last couple minutes that you're going to hear on the episode. But thanks for tuning in. This is John Perry Barlow, everybody. Check him out, please. It's you'll love it.
Welcome to the Internet Archive, and welcome to the John Perry Barlow Symposium. Welcome. I'm Brewster Kale, founder of the Internet Archive, and welcome to our home. How many of you have not been here before? Welcome to the Internet Archive. Just for sort of where are you? You're in a former church, a Christian Science church, and we thought we'd flatten the floors and make it into a library. But then we saw these great pews, and we thought, who could put up couldn't put up with awesome pews? So thank you very much for coming. And just a few things to sort of look at that are kind of fun. If you crane your head, those servers in the back actually are 10 petabytes, or about 1/4 of the total primary copy of the Internet Archive, and they're live. They're being served to everybody in the world. Every time a light blinks is somebody uploading something or downloading something from the archive. And also just the little statues that are around the side, they're us. If you work at the archive for 3 years, then we make a little statue, and sort of celebrate the people that are working on the civic side of the Internet Archive. And I'm very glad that you could come for the John Perry Barlow Symposium. Close friend, board member, co-board member with the Internet Archive, with myself on the EFF. And he was the first recipient of the Internet Archive Hero Award. And the reason why was because of his concept of sharing. And so he's meant something, I think, to a lot of us. And I think of technology when they're new, and you show them to people, it's kind of a Rorschach test. If you ask people, what is this new technology, say the internet, you learn more about the observer than the observed. You learn about what people, how they see their world. And John Perry Barlow came at it as radical sharing. And I think that embodies my internet. That is the way I sort of think of and was inspired by this. So I think it is a good match to have this event here at the Internet Archive. And no further ado, there will be a whole sequence of speakers. And thank you very much for coming.
I want to thank John Perry Barlow's daughters for working with us on making this so easily. You'll hear from two of them today. As a friend of Barlow for a long time, I really want to take a moment to extend a thanks to Alden Bevington and Geraldine Brandlois for the work and the help that they gave to Barlow during his last years. We should all have such good friends. I want to thank the speakers for jumping when I asked if they would come speak and throwing this together a little bit by the seat of our pants. I hope you'll all bear with us, but I think the seat of our pants is in honor of Barlow's spirit anyway, so I feel good about that. I want to thank all of you who donated to EFF and the Freedom of the Press Foundation. This is a bittersweet event for all of us who are here today. Every single person in this room wishes that Barlow was here with us instead of us celebrating his legacy. It's bringing things back up for a lot of people, me included, about what a horrible loss we've all suffered as a community. But here we are today, and our goal is to honor his legacy. And what a legacy it is. Originally, we wanted to have this event address all of Barlow's ideas across his entire life, ranging from his anti-Vietnam work to his anti-nuclear work, to his poetic song lyrics that stick in your head over and over again, to his environmental work, to maybe even something about ranching in Wyoming. But honestly, it was just too much. We knew that he wouldn't want us to just skirt the surface of his life, but instead go deep. And so I picked the topic that is the one that speaks most to me and to all the rest of us at EFF, which is his legacy of internet and internet freedom. I'm delighted at all the people who came forward to do this with us today. So a little about our format. A little about our format. What I've asked each of our speakers to do is to select a quote from Barlow that inspired them or that they think is important about internet freedom and give about an 8 to 10 minute presentation around it.
Well, I just want to say this is such a wonderful event for my family and I, and on the way over here I was thinking what a great thing it is that my dad doesn't have to be bummed about missing parties anymore, because now he can kind of go to all the parties and he gets the best seat in the house, which is great. So he would be so tickled about this amazing collection of some of his truly favorite minds and thinkers of all time in one room, talking about the ideas that he was most inspired by. Most of them happened to be good friends, but that's just kind of how he rolled with people that intrigued him the most. This speech was thrown together in the past few days, so bear with me here, but it's an honor to share some thoughts about him here.
I just have a couple slides I wanted to show here. So my name's Trevor Tim. I had the honor and privilege of co-founding Freedom of the Press Foundation with JP Barlow in 2012. Here you can see him with one of our other co-founders, Daniel Ellsberg. And so when we founded Freedom of the Press Foundation, I had just started a job as an activist at EFF. And like many other people who worked at EFF and in this room, I looked up to Barlow as kind of this mythical hero. But as soon as you meet him, just like every single other person who's ever met him, quickly you think that you're his best friend. And So he was really our guiding light when we first started. He was the organizational powerhouse that brought together people like Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and John Cusack and Dan Ellsberg to help start our organization. And on the day we launched, he wrote an article for the Huffington Post. And the quote I'm going to read is, I think, describes our beliefs better than I've heard before or since. And the quote is, "When a government becomes invisible, it becomes unaccountable. To expose its lies, errors, and illegal acts is not treason, it is a moral responsibility. Leaks become the lifeblood of a republic." And this article was called Crowdfunding the Public's Right to Know. And you'll see the phrase, the public's right to know, in a lot of Barlow's writing about a lot of different contexts. But in our context, it meant that press freedom was not just about protecting the journalists doing the reporting or even just the whistleblowers who get information to the reporters, but the public at large. That all of this is in furtherance of our ability to know what our government is doing behind closed doors under our name. And it is the quintessential idea behind what we had wanted to do from the start. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was inspire a new generation of whistleblowers, a new generation of Daniel Ellsbergs, which is what Barlow was trying to get across in that piece. And so the date on this tweet, which is the day that we launched, is December 16th, 2012. So a couple months later, unbeknownst to many of us, apparently at least one person kind of heard this call. And so a unnamed government employee got in contact with one of our first staffers, Micah Lee, who then connected him with two of our board members, Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. And less than 6 months later, everybody learned the name Edward Snowden. And so this is the first tweet that Barlow tweeted about Edward Snowden on the day, June 9th, 2013, that everybody learned his name for the first time. Over the preceding weeks and months, Barlow would become Snowden's most prominent and vocal backer in the press. He must have tweeted literally hundreds of times about Snowden, defending him from all angles. This was at the time where the government smear machine against Snowden was at its all-time peak. And he was taking on each and every one of these criticisms and really gave space for a lot of people in the civil liberties community and elsewhere to understand the importance of what Snowden did. I actually wanted to go back and scroll through all of the tweets, but taking screenshots was literally going to take me an hour. I mean, right now we're only like 3 weeks into the Snowden revelations, and they keep going for pages and pages and pages. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that I'm going to remember about Barlow, but what I think about most was that it was not just theoretical for him. You know, it was not just him saying these words, and then when the going got tough, you know, kind of backing off. He relished that fight, and because of his advocacy around this subject, Edward Snowden came forward, but also he taught everybody, you know, what it means to stick up for the public's right to know. And so with that, I will kick it over to Edward Snowden.
Can everybody hear? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm never going to get used to this.
Welcome, Ed. We've been waiting for you.
Okay, I'm going to pull these out because I'm hearing feedback. There are a lot of things that can be said about John Perry Barlow, or as I called him, JPB. He was a good man, he was a brave man, he was an original thinker. But something that I think does not get enough attention is the fact that he was a made man. This was an incredibly talented, charismatic individual. He could make and spend fortunes without needing any of us. He had no obligation to live a life that was touched by the struggles and challenges and politics that we're made to deal with and confront every single day. And for many of us, it's not a choice. We have no alternative. We have no special talent. We are not rock stars. But he chose to side with us. He chose that. And it is that choice that I think is the mark of highest distinguishment for his character. This was a man who actively sought discomfort when he had every opportunity to sort of stay in bed with the wonderful and interesting people that were involved in his life. And he never lost this. In fact, as he got older, in the brief time that I knew him, and I had the rare opportunity to share a stage with him, he became ever more politically involved, ever more politically astute, and ever more self-sacrificing. This was a man who was not afraid to say things that others were not. This was a man who was not afraid to ask questions that would make people uncomfortable and yet were necessary. And it was this trait that he put into the organizations and lives that he was connected to that brought me forward. You know, one of the stories that is very little told in the media, perhaps untold, is this story of, I'm sitting at the NSA as a high school dropout, being paid an extraordinary amount of money to help build and run machines to spy on you. And there were over 30,000 people working at the NSA at the time. This was a comfortable life, this was an easy life, and it was certainly the path of least resistance for me. Now, I started out as a true believer. I, too, had a choice. But as I climbed higher and higher levels of the government, as I gained access to more and more highly classified information, and eventually I reached the sort of highest peak of security clearance, I realized that something wasn't right. I realized that what was legal was not necessarily what was moral. I realized that what was being made public was not the same as what was true. And eventually this reached the point where we had the most senior intelligence official in the United States government, General James Clapper, who went before Congress. He swore an oath to tell the truth, nothing but the truth. We've all heard it. And he was asked by Senator Ronald Wyden, does the NSA spy on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans' communications? And the general immediately starts sweating, rubs his head, realizes he's on camera, thinks about it for a second. He's gotten these questions 24 hours in advance. And he says, no, sir, not wittingly. Now, this was a problem that John Perry Barlow understood, even though he didn't know exactly how that was a lie. he knew it didn't sit right. And he had talked to me about this after the fact, after I had come forward. But the idea here is that the story of 2013 and the mass surveillance revelations was never about surveillance. It was about democracy. What does it mean when we have a system of government, when we have elected officials, when we have the highest powers in our country accountable to the lowest standards of behavior? At the same time, if we break the smallest law as ordinary people, we face the highest consequences. Well, JPB created this organization, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, with his friends. He created the Freedom of the Press Foundation that I would later join myself and have the privilege of serving on the board with him alongside. And the idea is this. It's a question that he put, actually an argument that he put to me when I shared a stage, talking about the future of democracy with him before an audience. And I was talking about sort of where I thought the systems were breaking down, where things were working and where they weren't working, and what the sort of problems were in a very technical sort of engineer's way, because I'm not a politician by training. And he said that he thought really I was missing the point. And he was right. He said in the unique case of these United States, the whole question of national security, this entire area of conversation, of topic, is being misrepresented by the government to the detriment of the public. National security doesn't mean what they try to make you think it means. National security is not about terrorism. National security is not about military. National security means the security of our founding principles. It's not our borders. It's not our culture. It's not anything except those founding documents that we still profess to believe in. I'm quoting him. And if we are insecure in our beliefs and our willingness to protect and preserve those beliefs, that is a threat to national security, and perhaps the only one that matters. Now, I'm not even sure he knew this at the time, but when I was going about my sort of dark work at the NSA, gathering information about crimes against the public on a previously unprecedented scale, I was wearing a hoodie from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It was a parody of the NSA. When I came forward, the very first photograph that was made public of me in Hong Kong, where I was meeting with journalists to provide them this material, which then I lost access to because I didn't want to be exploited. I didn't want to be the person who was making the choices of what should and should not be made public. I felt this was the role of the Fourth Estate. This is the proper function, the necessary purpose of press in a free society, to contest the government's monopoly control of information. As much as it's wonderful when hackers go out and get this information for us, and as much as I think it is necessary for whistleblowers to share with us the information that we need to know, I wasn't elected president of disclosure, and I don't think anyone else is either. But this is why the First Amendment is first. In every free society, the legitimacy of government derives from a single principle: the consent of the governed. But that consent is only meaningful if it's informed. What happens when we cast votes for politicians who claim certain campaign promises, and then not only do they not deliver on them, they actually expand the surveillance programs that they pledged to terminate? And this, because I've gone on for a while here, is that part of John Perry Barlow's spirit that I admired. And this is the reason ultimately that led me to many of the choices in life that I've made. When I was a young man, I was reading his Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And perhaps that may have been that first seed of radicalization. I've said before that I used to work for the government, and now I work for the public. I'm not sure JPB ever had any other allegiance. His love was for all of us. This is why he's spent that long life that could have been so comfortable, so frictionless, constantly searching for the next battle, constantly searching for the next struggle. He told me on that same day, on that same stage, one of the things that he struggles with is people who turn away, people who don't think, people who are so in love with comfort that they forget that struggle is what drives us forward. He shared with me a saying that he says he got from the Navajo, which is the kind of thing that only an interesting guy like him can just pass off as a throwaway comment. You can't awaken somebody who's pretending to be asleep. John Perry Barlow woke me up. He raised a message, sounded an alarm, that I think we all heard. He did not save the world. None of us can. But maybe he started the movement that will. I want to thank him for everything that he did for me, for us, for the United States, and for this world. He was an incredible person. He was an inspiration to me, and it was an honor to have known him. There is one last thing that I'd like to say from him, which I will keep with me for the rest of my life as I think about what comes next for myself and hopefully for those of you in the room as well. I said, when we're looking at all of these problems that face the world today, that face our politics today, the partisanship, the incivility, the inhumanity, the injustice that fills every conversation, and we try to make the people who are in power confront that and fix that to do their jobs. I struggle with the question of, how it is that we correct this, what it is that we're supposed to do, and why it is that they feel so comfortable. And it came down finally to this feeling of immunity, of unaccountability that these powerful institutions all seem to enjoy. It didn't matter whether it was the Attorney General breaking the law. It didn't matter whether it was the CEO of Citibank breaking the law. They had a different standard of behavior. And when they saw the world, when they saw the system, when they saw how much control they had and how little we had, they said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he sat and he thought, and just took a long pause on stage in front of so many people, which is the kind of thing that only somebody like him could really get away with. I know I personally feel an obligation to fill the silence. And he said, the United States, such as it is today, exists to look at precisely that claim. What are you going to do about it? And to answer that question, and to answer it right. Ladies and gentlemen, the life of John Perry Barlow was an example of how to answer it right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed. Come on. Yeah, you can.
So our next speaker is John Gilmore. John John should need no introduction because of his many contributions. In addition to starting EFF, he started, depending on how you count, the first or second dial-up ISP, and has written some very key software that you've probably interacted with today and every day of your life for the last 15 or 20 years, if you're even a moderate technology user, and I imagine most of you are heavier than that. But for me, the thing the kind of koan that sums up Gilmore is a phrase he's well known for, a phrase that's actually gone beyond him, that the internet interprets censorship as damage and routes around it. And the first time I heard this, I thought it was by way of a prediction about technology, that our technology could route around the censorship in this kind of automated way. And what I realized when I actually sat down and talked to him about it is he was describing a thing Usenet administrators used to actually do, where they would sit down and go, you can't censor me, I'm going to route around you using these anti-damage protocols that we've developed. And what he was talking about is the culture that was present at the birth of the internet, a kind of mixed bag of a culture, but that had this strain in it of people who felt a kind of civic duty to the internet, to keep it to a place where we could have this society of the mind, where we could come together across borders and across interests and across different points of view in this very Barlovian way. And when I realized that that's what he was talking about, not that we'd built some technology that could recognize censorship and route around it, but that we'd built a culture committed to doing that, then I knew that we were onto something important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are probably 25 million Americans who have taken LSD. They would, if hard-pressed in private, also tell you that it profoundly changed their lives, and not necessarily for the worse. I will readily grant that some of these are hopeless crystal worshippers or psychedelic derelicts creeping around Oregon woods. But far more of them are successful members of society, CEOs, politicians, ministers, and community leaders. This is true, whether we want it to be or not. But the fact that so few among those millions dare utter this truth is, in a supposedly free country, a symptom of collective mental illness. Now that the worst of the war between the 50s and the 60s may be over, perhaps it may become possible. Many people may be able to do as they ought to have done decades ago, like the peculiarly honest Steve Jobs, and the peculiarly lucid John Perry Barlow, and the peculiarly persistent Rick Doblin, and the merely peculiar John Gilmore, and say in public, there was a moment years ago when I took LSD. And whatever the immediate consequences, it made me a different person than I would have been, and different in ways I have been grateful for all this time. By the way, everything I've said so far is literal quotes from Barlow, just slightly rearranged. And so is this. One can make a non-ludicrous case that the most important event in the cultural history of America since the 1860s was the introduction of LSD. Before acid hit American culture, even the rebels believed, as Thoreau, Emerson, and Whitman implicitly did, in something like God-given authority. Authority, all agreed, derived from a system wherein God, or Dad, or more often both, was on top and you were on the bottom. And it was no joke. Whatever else one might think of authority, it was not funny. But after one had rewired oneself with LSD, authority, with its preening pomp, its affection for ridiculous rituals of office, its fulsome grandiloquence, and eventually and sublimely its tarantella around mutually assured destruction, became hilarious to us, and there wasn't much we could do about it. No matter how huge and fearsome the puppets, once one's perceptions were wiped clean enough by the psychedelic solvent to behold their strings and the mechanical jerkiness of their behavior, it was hard to suppress the giggles. Though our hilarity has since been leavened with tragedy, loss, and a more appropriate sense of our own foolishness, we're laughing still. LSD is illegal primarily because it threatens the dominant American culture, the culture of control. Well, that's what Barlow thought. And after studying how to end the drug war for a few decades, I tend to agree. I think that Rick Doblin's approach is the most promising path toward ending the collective mental illness that Barlow diagnosed. Rick is using psychedelics in FDA-approved clinical trials, successfully treating traumatized, out-of-control women and soldiers, bringing them back into self-control. This is gradually removing psychedelics from the counterculture and making them less threatening to the culture. Now, one of the classic experiences that happen when people take psychedelics is to have the experience that all is one. It's a feeling of unity with everyone and everything, a feeling that you and I and God, the rocks and the trees and the stars are all the same person, the same thing, not just made of the same stuff, but literally the same. You can find echoes of these experiences throughout our world. The Indian namaste that salutes the divinity in another person. Thou art God from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. The all one of Jewish soap maker Dr. Bronner, which he hoped could heal the world against future holocausts. Barlow knew this oneness well. He seemed to embody it much of the time. In speaking to a women's gathering, Barlow said, "Anytime you're more in touch with the unity of all things, your chances of having a positive approach to the world are enhanced." And right here is where Barlow's psychedelic philosophizing merged with Barlow's internet philosophizing. In a 1992 keynote speech to the Usenix Association, Barlow said, "Earlier in the 20th century, the French philosopher and anthropologist Teilhard de Chardin wrote that evolution was an ascent toward what he called the omega point, when all consciousness would converge into unity, creating the collective organism of mind." Whether or not it represents Teilhard's vision, it seems clear that we are about some great work here, the physical wiring of collective human consciousness. The idea of connecting every mind to every other mind in full duplex broadband is one which, for a hippie mystic like me, said Barlow, has clear theological implications, despite the ironic fact that most of the builders are bit wranglers and protocol priests, a proudly prosaic lot. I know that when I've talked to computer audiences in times past, I've had a continuous question and complaint from people in the room. They say, "Well, you know, you want me to behave as though I were a social philosopher, and actually what I do is bus architecture." Well, exactly. I don't think you can expect the social philosophers to understand bus architecture very well for a while either. So both of those jobs fall to us, the people who understand the basic nature of this very different environment. Now, as we build and use the internet, Barlow cautioned us to distinguish data, information, and experience in ways that are often forgotten today. He had a 1990s conversation with John Brockman that later Brockman put in a book, and he explained, data differs from information. You can gather infinite sets of data with machines, but in order to convert data into information, a human mind has to process that data set and find it meaningful. That's the important difference between information and other kinds of products. Products of the physical world are generally themselves, regardless of the context. A toaster is a toaster is a toaster. In the informational world, however, each piece of information draws value from its direct relevance to the area of mind that is finding it meaningful or not meaningful. So then the next layer is experience, which also differs from information. Experience is the real-time interactive relationship between the sensorium and all the phenomena that the sensorium has available to it. Every synapse in my body is assessing my surrounding environment, is in an interactive relationship with it, is testing it, is on the alert. Whereas information, in most cases, is something taken from the realm of experience and compressed into a potable format that eviscerates and alienates. Information is like life jerky, dried up and not terribly communicative. Through information, you can come back to experience the vast set of phenomena that are creating the data in the first place. Experience and the universe itself are intimately bound up with one another. The purpose of the internet and all its surrounding phenomena is to create a context where experience is universal and the informational reduction is no longer necessary. It becomes possible for me to ask questions in real time of phenomena that are taking place where my body is not. If your objective is understanding, you don't want data, you don't want information. You want to simulate experience as much as possible because that's where understanding comes from. So, in another context, Barlow said, I really feel that what we're essentially doing here is reaching for that point at which human beings become so good at communicating with one another that they would create what would amount to a great collective organism of mind. I think we are going to become such a creature. Perhaps we already are. It is a very different kind of creature than has ever been seen in the universe before. It will be enormously powerful and intelligent, and you folks are helping it to be born. Thank you very much.
So that was wrapping up at the Internet Archive. You heard from a lot of amazing people there, all talking about how much they love this man, John Perry Barlow. I am myself very excited to do some more reading about him. Now, as if this couldn't get any cooler, I mean, this is a whole day of people being there to talk about their friend and to celebrate the life of their friend and to inspire a new generation of Barlovians. The very next day, Sunday, there was another, probably bigger, cooler, one might say, event in the works at the Fillmore. So if you don't know, the Fillmore Auditorium is a wonderful historic theater in San Francisco where the Grateful Dead played many times and where part of the hippie revolution was really focused. Bill Graham's Fillmore Auditorium, it's like where all of those trippy posters from the hippie music shows came from. You've seen those weird posters. That was all kind of started in the San Francisco area, I believe, around the 60s and 70s. And it's still a very, very cool place. And I've never been to the Fillmore a lot about it. It honestly didn't look like what I thought it would look like. So I was pleasantly entertained just by being there. So when I was staying in San Francisco, I met a woman named Geraldine who wrote the Grateful Dead family album. She collected all the photos that are in this book, the Grateful Dead family album. So she traveled with the Dead for many years. She was married to one of the band members, and she had her and her kids were totally in the Dead world that whole time. And so it was so much fun. I got to spend a lot of time with Geraldine this weekend. We even took time at 1:30 in the morning to drive all across town and do some errands because like between the Internet Archive event and the Fillmore Day, we're going on this like midnight drive doing some errands because she prefers driving at night when there's less traffic in the city. And it was a lot of fun. Geraldine's so cool. She's got a million stories, and you should all check out right now GratefulDeadFamilyAlbum.com. This is the book that she published. She explained she just got the rights back to her book, and so they're doing it online now. So they put the whole book online, and they've added a bunch of stuff. They've added Barlow to a bunch of pages that he wasn't in before, because he was such a integral group of the band, part of the band for a while, writing songs. And so anyway, check out the Grateful Dead Family album, GratefulDeadFamilyAlbum.com. Geraldine did all this. Geraldine was in charge of the guest list at the Fillmore, which I honestly think is probably the most important thing. I mean, she was stressing out about it because Ticketmaster made a mistake, and like all the tickets that were bought weren't registered. Like their lists got confused, and I don't know. There was a who's paying for ticket list, and there's a who's just on the VIP list sort of list, and somehow it fell down to Geraldine to run the list. She was the list master, and she stood at the door, and she made sure that all the right people got in, and she helped me get in to the Fillmore, and I was so grateful to her. And I met her niece, and I hung out with them, and I carried the baby stroller in with her niece, who was walking in on the VIP list. That was sort of how I got in. But I was totally supported in attending and in being there, and that meant so much to me because, again, I had never met Mr. Barlow, and I was just learning about him and getting excited about him. But I met all his friends and family, and they were so kind to me. So if that is any indication on what kind of man Barlow truly was, I bet half the stuff these people said were actually true, and that anybody would be pleased to have met this man. Anyway, what I'm going to do now for the last couple minutes is cut to some audio from the Fillmore. Again, you can watch this online. Type in Barlow's graduation from Meatspace. That is the name of this event. His graduation from Meatspace. You can watch the whole 4 or 5 hour long stream from the Fillmore that night, which is really excellent. So check it out. You can hear it all. What I want to show you now is just he and his daughters are singing a song that he wrote near the end of the night. I'm going to play that, and after that, after his daughters sing, you're going to hear a little from the man himself, a recording from one of his TED Talks not too many years ago, and he really explains. I think they chose to run this clip of him speaking at the very end of the Fillmore event, and I feel like it was very fitting because he's just simply talking about love. And if you boil it all down to it, all of his interests, his whole career being a Wyoming cattle rancher, on top of his internet activism and his psychedelicness and everything else about him, the man was a man about love. So we're going to cut to the Fillmore, and then I'll let Barlow end the episode, and we'll say goodbye. So thank you all so much. This has been the Harm Reduction Report. Willard TeaBelly here, calling in from good old California. See you soon. Sandbag on.
Little girl lost in a forest of dreams. It's a dark old wood and it's damp with dew. Hoot owl hoots for a moment. Something big and cold's got a hold of you. Just when everything gets scary, your daddy's coming round for his darling again. Hold my hand with your little fingers. Daddy's loving arms is gonna gather you. Daddy's here and he never will forget you. I will take you home. I will take you home. Gonna carry you back home in my arms. I will take you home. Long is the road we must travel on down, and short are the legs that we struggle behind. I wish I knew for sure just where we were bound. cheer you. Flowers to color the fields around. Wherever you go, I will be right here near you. You can't get lost when you're always found. Ain't no fog that's thick enough to hide you. Your daddy's gonna be right here beside you. If the fear should start to get inside you, I will take you home. I will take you home. Gonna carry you back home in arms. I will take you home.
Why would the soul come into the world? What would be the point of that? And suddenly it became very clear to me that the reason the soul comes into the world is so that love will make sense, so that love will have a context, so that love will have the frame of fear and doubt and decay and the Republican Party and nuclear weapons and, the terrible inner self-loathing that each of us carries around for no good reason, which is my idea of original sin. And that we are all volunteers here. That we come into the world from the other side, which is entirely made of love, where it's all open and couldn't be opener, into this place of constricture and containment and closure and dogma and terror. And we fight with our hearts in the high mountains of the Afghanistan of the soul in order for love to make sense. And by not giving up, and by not thinking the worst of ourselves or others, and mostly to the extent that we're capable of doing it, by learning how to actually accept love from other people, we win that battle for every soul born and unborn. And that is why we were here.